Before we get started, I just wanted to remind everyone that if you are not speaking, please keep your microphone muted, but do please feel free to jump in and ask questions throughout the presentation. You can enter them in the chat feature, or you can raise your hand or just unmute your microphone and jump on in. So today's session will focus on an overview of the ECCC Islands project. Through this session, we are hoping to hear from the Mi'kmaq on the history and current use of Eelhout, Country Island, and St. Paul's Island. We've been working with Environment and Climate Change Canada to develop a co-management plan for these islands. We have worked on invasive species, archaeological heritage, and identifying traditional landscapes so far. But we still need to hear from and have conversations with community members, elders, and knowledge holders on the past and present use of these islands. The information that we gather will allow us to develop a stronger position for continuing co-management of these islands into the future and ensure continued Mi'kmaq use. So today we'll hear from Sherilyn Young, who works as a Consultation Project Support Officer at KMK. And with that, let me turn things over to Sherilyn, who can dive deeper into this topic.
So before I start sharing my screen, I'm just going to give a brief introduction of myself. Delawisi Sherilyn Young, Alugwe Gumugmaglewis Wale Milagweg. Good afternoon. I'm so happy to be here and be presenting this afternoon. And on this very, very important topic. I work for, as I just said, I work for KMK now as a Consultation Project Support Officer, and that's the same thing Amy just alluded to. But Alugwe Gamuja Hamek, I also work for the forest or with the forest, and I'm very aspirational about anything that's really in that wooded area, anything that we can try and protect and conserve and use and steward. I heard the word management being used quite a bit. Just wanted to make a quick note that we really don't manage these lands. These lands are to be stewarded and not really managed. So with that, I'm gonna start sharing my screen. And sorry, I should apologize in advance. I do some little wiggles and dances. So if you see that, I'm sorry.
Looks great, Sherilyn.
Okay, so as Amy already said, this is a co-management project for Eelhout, Country Island, and St. Paul's Islands. This will be considered as a knowledge holders and elders engagement session. So in 2020, Environment Climate Change Canada approached KMKNO with a contribution agreement to begin the co-stewardship or co-management of 3 different islands. Again, the management term is not my preferred term, but that's the term that is typically used. KMKNO, we worked to develop a project outline, and the project was titled the Co-Management of Eelhout, Country Island and St. Paul's Island, which is north of Cape Breton or Unama'ki. Engaging with Mi'kmaq communities and the expansion of Environment and Climate Change Canada's protected areas network in Nova Scotia. We had 4 main subjects that we wanted to focus on as we went through this process and went through this project. So the first would be the vulnerable of select islands to invasive species. With invasive species, we always have the risk of loss of flora, loss of fauna, the disruption of a complete ecosite, and with the disruption of a complete ecosite, as we know with some species that are down in Southwest Nova Scotia, for example, hemlock woolly dogget, we can also cause uprooting and then therefore loss of archaeological heritage. So we also wanted to see and determine the possibility or potential of archaeological heritage on these islands. With that, we can also identify traditional landscapes. We have data, pre-existing data that we've been using and trying to focus on, but that also leads into then elder and knowledge holder engagement in order to be able to identify all of these 4 main topics that we were looking to gather more information about. And please, at any point in time, feel free to jump in the call. I want to keep this as fluid and as comfortable as possible so we can just have a conversation. I am a little hot. I have my wood stove on and I have south-facing windows, and it is getting about 26 degrees in here now. So just gonna have the occasional fan. What can I tell you about Eelhout? Well, I mean, apart from its continuous use, it is the most culturally, I would say, aware area that I have been. And What I mean by that is you can feel the presence. You can feel the presence of our ancestors when you were there. It is absolutely incredible, and I felt so privileged to be there. It's situated in the upper regions of Bay of Fundy in Nova Scotia, near the entrance of the Minas Basin, and it's considered part of the Cumberland County, Mi'kmaq. It's approximately 3 kilometers long, so not super large, and 400 meters wide. Historically, in 1878, there was a lighthouse built there, and it was staffed by one individual up until around 1956 when it collapsed due to a fire. That's why you see all of these lilies. They're not native, but they're present all over the island. It's been used since time immemorial by the Mi'kmaq, and it continues to be used by the Mi'kmaq. Currently, it's federally owned. The island's being Canadian Coast Guard to the Canadian Wildlife Service, ECCC, to protect its unique ecosystem, and it will be co-managed or co-stewarded by the Mi'kmaq. The island is also protected under Nova Scotia Special Places Act to protect any archaeological sites that may be present there. So as you may be aware, where there's potential for archaeology, there can be no digging without any permit, and removal of artifacts is completely prohibited. And some other names, Maskusidik, sorry, Illinois, Ganamasi, I'm still learning, and High Island. So if you look at my rather large arrow here, this kind of gives you an idea of exactly where it's situated. It's pretty small, and it's visible from the shore. It's visible, I believe, from Wolfville, if you look out. So what did we find so far? We did find archaeological sites, which is incredible, but we also found the presence of root rot fungus. So most of the red spruce on the island is depleted. It's either deceased or gone. If you know anything about root rot, it usually, once your tree has it, and the tree is going to be girdled and down within a matter of it wouldn't even take a year. So when we have this type of event occur, it causes uprooting. Fortunately, with illote, though, there's a lot of short-lived intolerant species there. There's a lot of other hardwoods on the island, and there's a huge amount of grassland. So the consideration for ground disturbance or increased sedimentation or rut-in wasn't really heavy because of the presence of these intolerant species. There was also a number of craft materials, medicines, and food sources. Just for example, there was tea berry, there was fruit and trees and plants like blackberry, raspberry, apple, etc. There was cucumber root present. There was ash trees present. No Wisco, white ash. There was gold thread present and moose maple. I was very excited to see moose maple. And if you know me, you know that I love striped maple. On Country Island is located off of southeast coast of Nova Scotia, approximately 5 kilometers away from the coast of the mainland. It's considered a part of Guysborough County. It has the largest amount of the endangered roseate terns, about 25% of all of Canada's terns in this particular area. It has a long history of use. It's been used for, I think, by NSP, but I could entirely be wrong on that, so don't hold me to that. But it's also been used by, there's a lighthouse there, there was other buildings there. So the presence of archaeological sites or continued Mi'kmaq use didn't stand out. It's approximately 800 meters by 500 meters in diameter. And if you look at my slightly larger red arrow this time, this is where it's located, just south of Cottles Harbor and New Harbor. So what did we find? We didn't find any immediate threat to possible archaeological sites. There was large monocultures of stunted white spruce. It's in the Atlantic Ocean. The spruce are going to be stunted with very little in the understory. So there was strawberry, there was cranberry, raspberry, tea berry, coral fungus, flat oysterling, which is toxic, and there were surfers off of the coast of the island. There was also the presence of seals onshore. So and there was the presence of or indication of a traditional hunting area, but there was no immediate sites of significance. Erosion markers were installed onto the island. They were placed by our staff and by ECCC, and we will be monitoring those in the future just to determine what the erosion rate on that island may be. And finally, St. Paul's Island, and I feel like I'm going really, really fast, so if you feel the need to jump in, please do, and slow me down a little bit. But St. Paul's Island is approximately 4.8 kilometers long by 1.6 kilometers long. It's quite a bit larger. It's quite a bit further off of shore than the other two islands. It sits approximately 24 kilometers northeast of northern Unama'ki, and it's 71 kilometers from southwest Cape Ray in Newfoundland. There is remains of World War II radar station, and it's still there. It's facing a landing area, and it's also inhabited by numerous seabirds, but there's not really much else for wildlife. It's currently federally owned. It's also being transferred by the Canadian Coast Guard to ECCC to protect its unique ecosystem, and will be co-stewarded by the Mi'kmaq. There's also 2 small lakes in the interior, and it's stocked with trout, and its ecosystem is super delicate. So there's going to, in the future, if we continue to co-steward or co-manage this area, we're going to try and prohibit the amount of time that people can go to that island just because of the sensitive ecosite. There was also one very, very lonely coyote on that island, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. And because I committed to making my arrows so large, here's one gigantic arrow pointing to St. Paul's Island. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor. So we didn't find any immediate threat to possible archaeological sites, although we did locate where those sites may be. We found medicinal, recreational, food and crafting vegetation. It was very typical of a boreal forest setting with the inclusion of some Wabanaki forest species. So red spruce and moose maple were also present on the island. There was a huge, I'm very curious, little seal, huge amount of whale activity, but there was no immediate sites of significance. And one very lone coyote who's eaten very well. We think that he possibly got stuck on some ice or came up in the winter, but he seems to be enjoying himself. He wasn't very keen on us visiting the island. He ran away, but he doesn't seem to be in any immediate danger at this point in time. And possibly in the future, it might be a good idea for a children's book for somebody who's better at writing that than I am. So I'm going to just go to the chat now to see if anybody has provided any comments. And if you want to jump in and tell us a little bit more about what you know about these islands, I would love to hear it. So Craig Paul says, coincidentally, the island also resembles a feather, maybe even an eagle feather. Which island were you referring to, Craig?
I think Craig sent that while you were talking about Eelhout.
Okay, yeah. And it is, holy moly, Craig. I'm not sure if you've had an opportunity to visit that island, but wow, it is absolutely stunning. Maybe we'll take a couple of canoes out.
Sounds like a plan to me.
And I'm just going to close my chat here for a second. I do see there's a question here, but just give me 1 second. Okay, so Walalio, I'm going to go back to the very beginning of the presentation and go back to Eelhout. For Eelhout, because its present use is still very much there. The biggest thing that we're asking is just to be respectful while you're on the island. And if you're not, like, our request was that only still be able to access that island and use that island in the way that they have since time immemorial. So there really wouldn't be any challenges to rights-based activities on that particular island. The limited accessibility, would be more so for individuals who didn't have that cultural connection to that area. Amy, I'm not sure if you can help me, but I can't find it.
Yes, I can read any questions that come in if that's helpful. I think you just answered the one we just had from Scott. That is, what is the protocol for going to Eelhout nowadays? So I think you covered that, and that's all we have for now.
Yeah, if you are non-Indigenous, non-Mi'kmaq, and you want to go to Ilot, that's something that would have to be guided by ECCC.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I live in Ogilvy, which is like on the shore, and Eelhout's like right there. I'm not Ilnu, but I'm Cree from Manitoba, and I know like I know some people take their boats out there, but I don't think they actually go on the island. It's just to kind of see, and I've heard stories of people camping out there in the past, but from my understanding, it's sort of a protected area now, right?
It is sort of a protected area now because of it's just a really sensitive site. So you're still Indigenous and you still have these values, being Cree. Myself, I'm Cree Mi'kmaq, and then German French, which is why I look the way I look, which is kind of funny, sorry. But you still have those same values, but do you necessarily have that connection to the island? So I guess it depends on who your people are and where you see yourself and where you stand. But from an environment, climate change, Canada perspective, anybody who's at this time who's not Mi'kmaq would have to be guided on that island for a guided tour.
Okay, thank you.
We do have one more question in the chat from Craig. He says, if anything were to be found, such as artifacts on any of the islands, what would the protocol be?
We leave them there. And they belong to the island. They belong to the people, so we leave them there. We have removed a couple of artifacts just for the protection of them because they were in an immediate eyesight. So we didn't want them to get taken. We didn't want them to get stolen, for lack of a better word. So we did remove those, and those are within, I'm looking for a better word than custody, because that's not a great word. But they're currently being protected under our rights-based protocols. And as you can see there's an arrowhead. That one was actually found on Ilot. It's in my hand there, but it was found by another individual of the team. So props to them for their eagle eye.
Hi, this is Scott again. I also, with regards to St. Paul Island, did they still allow ham radio people to go there? Because what I read, it was like sort of this, special spot to send and receive a message, and that sometimes people got permission to go there to do that.
I'm not entirely sure, but I can look into that and get back to you.
Yeah, I forget where I read that. I think one summer I wanted to go to like all, the most northerly, easterly, westerly points of Nova Scotia, and St. Paul's Island came up as the most northernly, I guess. And I think when I was reading about it, it said no, people aren't really allowed to go there, but ham radio operators sometimes get special permission.
I'm not sure if that's still the circumstance, but I'm going, if you want to leave your email with Amy or myself, I'd be happy to get back to you on that.
Sure.
And I did make a note of it.
I'll just put my email in the chat. That's okay if everybody sees it.
It doesn't look like we have any more questions. Sherilyn, if we wanted to move to the next topic.
We're good. I'm gonna close the chat here so I can move my screen. We did finish up rather quickly because I speak in a mile a minute, especially when I'm a little bit nervous. But if there's at any point in time you would like to go back through anything that I shared here today, I'd be happy to do that. Be happy to share that information. And I'd be happy to learn more about those islands, because ultimately that's what's going to help us steward that island in the best way for the Mi'kmaq in the future. We're doing this for the Mi'kmaq by the Mi'kmaq. So if you feel as though somebody is better suited to steward those islands, then we need to hear that. If you're happy with the work that we're doing, with respect to those islands, we also need to hear that. Well, Alio, thank you all.
Sherilyn,
Yeah,
just a quick question. I'm just trying to think of a question to ask. I did see the 3 islands, 3 properties or islands that you co-managed through KMKNO and collaborative work in relationship with, did you say the federal province or the federal partners? Is there other islands of such nature? Because I think somewhere along the South Shore, there's islands that are privately owned. There's quite a bit of islands that are privately owned. Is there a possibility that these islands may hold such similar significance as these 3 islands do, and that they're now in the hands of, private owners? Is there a chance like these islands will eventually maybe revert back to the Mi'kmaq Nation or to the feds, or do you know? I'm just curious.
looking for my mute button. Oh, no, I'm already unmuted. So Craig, yes, absolutely. There's always a chance. So they would be federally, they're being transferred right now federally. And the federal government, they acknowledged that these islands had long-term use, they had long-term historical use. So that's when they reached out to us and they said, how can we best steward these islands with you? And that's where that's when we developed the project plan. And that's ultimately when we said, okay, we need engagement, we need involvement from our communities, because we need to know how they want us to communicate that message. I do see another question from Alicia. Can I answer that? Craig, if I answered your question, I'm going to assume, Craig, that you're happy. And if you're not, you can just reach out to me later.
I see a thumbs up from Craig, so I think we're good on his end.
Okay. So have the Mi'kmaq Grand Council been asked or involved in any way? So we've taken this to the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs. And that's where the key involvement has been. It's also gone through to CMM and UINR. We've asked for feedback from a number of different individuals and Mi'kmaq organizations, just to see if they can get their communities involved in any way. I'm not sure if that really answers the question.
If I may jump in for a second, Sherilyn, to everyone online, I dropped a link to a survey in the chat function if you wanted to participate. It's just to gather some additional feedback or on all these topics. So feel free to participate, win a prize. Thank you.
I would love to hear more about that.
Oh, are you referring to the comment in the chat?
Yes.
I'll read that out. So this individual has said, my grandfather traveled to Eelhout as a child in a birch bark canoe.
Melissa, if you have any more information about that, I would love to hear more.
Absolutely. And actually, a number of the islands around Southwest Nova were also places that they would go, him and his grandfather. So they're like, to kind of add on to the question, are other islands being looked at? I think that's an excellent idea to consider other islands. I know these ones are part of that Coast Guard to ECCC changeover, but it definitely opens the door for other islands to be looked at.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely does. I'm thinking about this now, but yes, it definitely does. And I know that there's some private islands that have already been owned and they're not necessarily up for sale. And I always kind of get a little sad when I see these islands go up for sale, just because I know the history behind them. And just because I know where they are and who they belong to. So seeing such a significant land base go up for sale and then have that private land ownership, it's a little disheartening at times. What is the legal status of these islands right now? I'm not sure if they've entirely been designated as protected areas, but I believe they have protected wildlife areas. That's where we were working towards. There's a plague in Morden referring to Ilote and the Mi'kmaq. I can absolutely share the PowerPoint presentation. Would that be okay, Amy? I can't hear you. You're on mute. It's you this time.
Pardon me. Yes, if you're comfortable sharing that content.
Okay, perfect. That'd be beautiful. There is a plaque in Morden referring to Ilote and the Mi'kmaq.
Yeah, I wasn't
not-
quite sure if you were aware that Morden is just a couple communities down from where I live, and it's actually called the French Cross, and there's a plaque there that mentions a gentleman canoeing to Eelhout with some Mi'kmaq boys, I think, and I don't think I don't know if they made it or not, or at least the plaque says they weren't seen. Again, I don't know. I think this gentleman was like trying to escape. It was like during expulsion time. So that's in Morden, Nova Scotia, which is like the next community down from Harborville, I guess, going towards Digby on the shore.
Okay, thank you for that information. I had no idea.
Yeah, if you like Google French Cross, there might be something online about it, but you can just go there too.
I noted that, so I will be following up about that.
Oh yeah, here I'll plop a link in the chat here for everybody.
And Alicia, am I saying your name correctly?
It's Alicia.
Alicia, I'm so sorry. I have everyone pronounces my name wrong too. So I sincerely apologize about that. Alicia, I will be following up with you a little bit later today and I'll forward that presentation off to you, okay?
Thank you.
Oh, we had a comment from Melissa as well. She had poor service, so wasn't able to finish her comment, but she'd be happy to chat more about the birch bark canoe and
Thank you,
travel to the
Melissa.
island.
It's been too long. We should probably touch base soon anyway.
Do we have any more questions for Sherilyn? Oh, Craig has his hand raised. Craig, go ahead.
Sorry for asking so many questions, Sherilyn. But because we were going into the conversation with a few of the, I think Scott mentioned the story about the cross. Melissa mentioned the story about the grandfather canoeing to these islands or to one specific island. Is there like, I know you do the co-management of the ecosystem mostly on these islands, the artifacts and the sort of the ecosystems. Is there like associated with those, things that you do? Is there like a data bank of stories that retell these islands being inhabited by the Mi'kmaq back in the day? Like it'd be interesting to see not only what's on the island in terms of like black ash or whatever you want to say, daisies. Be interesting to see. Yes, there's stories as well of indigenous people going to these islands for whatever reason. It'd be a great link to have it as well because I'm a picture kind of story kind of guy. I like to see like stories. Oh wow, they did travel there. Oh wow, there's a Mi'kmaq person who maybe left because of, again, Scott was mentioning expulsion, which would have been centralization possibly, and or even residential schools, and to run away from, some such things. It'd be interesting to know would any of these islands, either Country Island, Eelhout, or even the other island out of Cape Breton there. So I'm just curious if there's stories that are associated with these. And I know, Sherilyn, that's a little from your avenue of work, but it'd be interesting to see.
So we haven't, this is where the disconnect is. So we haven't been able to find a data bank of stories. We haven't been able to really acquire that information or that knowledge. And that's why we're sitting here today. And hopefully we can sit here on many other chats about this and continue this discussion. There's that disconnect. And I think there's that disconnect because this is part of reconciliation. We're still finding our voice and we're still looking for ways to be able to share those stories. And Craig, never, ever, ever apologize for asking a question or asking many questions. I love it. Thank you.
Have a nice day. Thank you, and look forward to hearing more. I work at King's Tech. I got to get back to work now. So cheers, everybody. Nemaltis.
Nemaltis.
Oh,
What is fishing like around there? That is an excellent question, Stacy, and thank you for asking that. So interestingly enough, we had some fishermen get stuck near the island. So fishing is quite well. But there was a very windy event and we had some fishermen actually get stuck near the island, and they actually used that island for shelter, so that their boats wouldn't get tossed around too much. But fishing is tremendous out that way, especially for a Mi'kmaq moderate livelihood fishermen. Fishing is great. I'm not sure what they're fishing, but fishing is great. Laura, to answer your question, yes, you will be able to view this later. This presentation was recorded, and I'm comfortable with sharing this presentation too, if it's okay with my team. And Melissa, thank you for your comment.
Laura, if you wanted to leave your contact info and email to Sherilyn or I, we can definitely send you some additional information.
Mm-hmm.
So just while we're waiting for a few more questions to come in, again, that link to the surveys in the chat if you want to participate, or if you have questions later after we close, or you're rewatching the recording and have more questions, feel free to email them into us. You can drop them in the chat now, or email us at info@mi'kmaqrights.com or on the contact us form on the website, and we'll make sure that they get directed to where they need to go. I don't know if we're going to have any more questions today, Sherilyn. Should we wrap up, or did you want to hang on and see what happens?
I am 100% comfortable with wrapping up. Do I know the Mi'kmaq names of the islands? I do not. So we do have some that have been sent in to us, but there is no real process right now for being able to identify Mi'kmaq names for locations, but we have been given some indications of what they might be. I'm still learning to speak Mi'kmaq, and I'm not great, but yes. So say St. Paul's Island. Oh, wow. Jerry, would you mind saying that out loud? Not to put you on the spot. If you're not comfortable with it, that's okay too.
Or even in the chat, sharing some suggested pronunciation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've done some research and we've had some suggested names for those islands, but we don't know entirely what they are. And then because there's not a finalized process of how to be able to identify what the best names for those islands would be, we just haven't come to a conclusion for the Mi'kmaq names at this time. It is in the works.
Sherilyn,
Yes.
I'm just looking at the Mi'kmaq word posted there by Jerry. Me and Jared are here trying to actually pronounce it. Gikto Minigu. Miniguk means just a place, Miniguk. It could be Minigu or Miniguk. But Gikto Minigu, that's what it seems like to us. But when I translate that in what I know, Gikto Minigu means like an island that's circular. Now I don't know if that's the correct meaning, word, but Gikto means like a round or corner.
Yeah, like Gutorasik.
Gikto Hasin,
Good
just like
right,
going around in
Minigu.
a circle. So I don't know if that means anything with the island, of course, being circular in sense, but Gikto Minigu is like circular island.
That's
what I
very
read.
curious.
That's what I read
Because
from it. Yeah, go ahead.
no, thank you, Craig. That's very curious because that's the same response that we got for Country Island. And if you look at Country Island, I'm just going to close my chat here, so please speak up if you have something you'd like to say. But I'm going to look at you. This is St. Paul's. If you look at Country Island right here, it's very round. And if you're on it and you're traveling it, it's not very far, and it's a very circular island. So that was sort of the same response that we got for that particular island, as opposed to St. Paul's Island, which is, and that's a terrible picture of it. It's very zoomed out, but it's essentially much narrower and much longer, but the top piece is a little rounder. We have checked out the Megama place names map. It's not always entirely accurate, and it's not always entirely what is representative of the community. But thank you for that suggestion. Well, Gerard, St. Paul's Island is it's quite an adventure to get to. We had to traverse there by helicopter. So I'm not entirely sure what the protocol would be to get there, or for having the means to get there. But I would say at this point in time, because it is a protected area, it has a very sensitive ecosystem. If you're all new, there's no issue with you going to that island at this time. But if you are, if you're not at this time, because because of that rights-based, again, application, if you're not all new at this time, it's considered a protected area. So it would have to be under the guidance of ECCC. But it's an adventure. Like it would take a long time to get there.
Yeah,
By
sounds
boat,
fun.
that is. It was, yeah, it was considered the halfway place. It's not quite halfway. That's a little inaccurate. It's more so, it's closer to Onamagi, and you can actually see it from the North Shore. But it's not quite as visible from Newfoundland, but I think it may be on a very clear day. I think that when Craig Hodder and I were on the island, both of us were saying, you know, I could actually be able to see on a very clear day, be able to see Newfoundland, and maybe that's how our people in the past were able to travel and determine that there was a place to go from there. For both Jerry and Laura. Craig is also on the call here. Craig, do you recall seeing puffins on the island? I don't recall seeing any puffins. I was mostly focused on the coyote. I was very excited to have found a presence of coyote there. Yeah. But perhaps on the northern shore, there may be. I'm not entirely sure. But I can certainly find out and get back to you, Jerry. It was coyote tracks and coyote scat. So I'm very certain that it was a coyote. I don't think it was quite large enough to be a wolf, but it could have been a juvenile wolf. But the coyote tracks itself, like the impression, that was very very characteristic of a coyote, not a wolf. Very cool, yes. I feel like he may have been exiled. Poor coyote. Yes, wily coyote. And for those of you who are watching this in the future and are hearing this chat, I'm responding to comments that are being made in the chat function. Sorry, Laura, can you clarify your question? How is the shore erosion there? The shore erosion where exactly? On St. Paul's Island. So St. Paul's Island is mostly a granite island. It's very rocky. So the shore erosion there is not, it's not something that's overly concerning. There's obviously some erosion. There's been some beaten down cliffs and rock walls, but it's very hard surface, unlike Illote, which is mostly sand along the cliff walls. And yes, Jerry, the presentation is being recorded, so you will be able to watch this later on. And there was a question earlier about whether or not the Grand Council had been notified about this. I just received a message from one of my coworkers, and I don't believe that I answered the question very well, so she picked up on it. We do have a Grand Council on the assembly meeting, so yes, they are aware of this project. At this time, there are just the 3 that have been proposed. So Illote, Country Island, and St. Paul's Island. There may be more in the future. So I think what we just seen there, you just heard my phone, it's a Star Wars ringer, is that we're all only human, and then sometimes these things happen. I did mean to turn that phone on silent, but I clearly missed that. Apologies for that. Any legends of Glooscap stories, connections to them? I haven't heard any at this time, Laura, but if you have any information that you would like to share that you may know of, I would be very open into receiving that. It's a relatively small audience, so to have this many questions coming from a relatively small audience is absolutely thrilling. Thank you.
Very interesting. Craig, Eelhout is said to be formed after Glooskap turned a moose to stone as he and his dogs were chasing it. His dogs stood by or stand watch by Advocate Harbor. Really neat.
And Craig Hodder, if you're interested in sharing more about that story, I would love to hear it. Laura Prosper says, my grandmother told a story of Glooskap getting angry at the huge beaver one time, and he threw him and turned him into an island near Wagama. That's very cool. That's a very interesting story. It seems Glooskap has a history of throwing things. Alicia says, I heard the same story, but I don't recall which island. And then, oh, it was Sugarloaf Mountain in New Brunswick. Laura Prosper says not Miniku, more near the south side. Laura, did you want to share more information about that?
Yeah, so my grandmother one time, she told a story of that's when we used to be in Mulla, when we would go Maliguish to go our summer camps with her, and she would take the boys one time and the girls another time, and at one time we were there, she was telling us stories about just out by the campfire, you know. I wish we do more of that stuff nowadays, but we don't. But she told a story about the beaver and how the beaver was so vain one time ago, and he'd be walking around with his big, long, skinny tail, and he was so vain and lazy. And Glooskap didn't like that and told him, you got to get moving. You got to start doing this and doing that. And the beaver wouldn't listen. So I thought he threw the beaver, but he didn't, now that I'm recalling the story. So the beaver wouldn't listen to Glooskap. And he kept walking and going, oh, I'm not even going to listen to you anymore. You know, you keep mounting up, keep saying what you want to say. The beaver's just being too well upset, you know. He thinks he's the best and the most beautiful out there. And Glooskap took it and took a rock and he threw the rock. And when he threw the rock, it landed on the beaver's tail and flattened it. So the beaver ended up having a flat tail from this rock that landed, this big rock that landed in the water in Southside. And in Southside, there's like all the fishermen are always there. And on the inside of areas where they go trapping for the beavers there now. But she told us that story about that specific area. And if you look in that little island, that little area, there's like a boulder, big, huge little island there. It has trees and fauna and flowers and everything on it, but it's only about maybe 20 feet round, maybe 40 feet. It's not very big. But that's the story how she told us about when you don't listen and you don't do what you're being told and you don't take responsibility of it and share, you know, you share your own part and your vanity and all this stuff. Anyway, I thought it was a hilarious story. We were laughing. We thought it was so funny. Just the way she emphasized the tail, holding his flat tail now. It was so beautiful and long, but now it's flattened as a rock, right? Pancake, she said. Good day, pancake, she says. That's how she would say it. Anyway, it was hilarious. But yeah, that's that little story, and that's that particular area about it.
That's very funny. That's very funny. I've heard a number of different stories about Glooskap now, and I always think back. So my grandmother had this thing called a switch, you know, a piece of alder. I wonder if there was any ties between Glooskap and the switch at that time, especially with your comment. I think it was your comment, whipping us into shape.
Yeah, you had to pick your own switches back then. I forget what they call them, skusogen. I think they call it skusogen. And you had to go to the bush over there and pick your switches. There was like 7 of them you had to pick. And I remember I never had to pick any myself, but I was there with my first cousins that were living with my grandmother that had to go pick them. So we'd be standing there deciding, and we'd be testing them, right? Okay, which ones are the best, you know, that aren't going to hurt as much. But if you don't pick the right ones, you're gonna, and if they fail the first inspection, you have to go back and get the right ones. Yeah.
Oh my. Different times now. I can only imagine what my son would say if I made him go and pick out his own switch. Thank you for sharing that story, Laura. Llewellyn.
I love how many questions and comments and stories have come in from the group today. It's great.
I'm very, very happy to have some feedback and that, be able to gauge that interest and actually have that interest come back to us. That's a step closer to being able to accomplish, meaningful stewardship of these areas, because that's ultimately, that's what we want to do. We don't want to limit any Mi'kmaq use for these islands. They've been used since time immemorial, and the rights-based activities should still be able to occur on those islands. On a little more serious note. And just to be clear, we would never hinder any rights-based activities on any of these islands, regardless. And we're here to support.
Do we want to wait a few more minutes to see if anyone has any more questions?
I'm happy with waiting a few more minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. My coffee has cooled down, so it's more like a nice coffee now.
So for anyone still here or just arriving, we're taking questions, comments, stories, any feedback. Feel free to raise your hand or drop it in the chat. Okay, so it doesn't look like we've had any more comments or questions. So I think we will wrap up today. As I said before, if you have more questions about the presentation or anything else, feel free to reach out to us. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Walalio, namotosi.